Loretta Jennings is 76 years old, living quietly in a small southern town. But one night, hate comes crashing onto her doorstep. Masked men attack her and laugh as they speed away, convinced she's powerless. They couldn't be more wrong, because Loretta has a son, Daniel Jennings. And Daniel isn't just any son. He's a federal agent trained to dismantle hate groups from the inside. But when Daniel returns home to protect his mother, he uncovers a dark secret. The Klan isn't just a gang of thugs. Now the question is, how far will a son go to defend his mother? And what happens when small-town hate collides with federal justice? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Loretta Jennings stepped out of First Baptist Church into the cool spring evening, her heart still light from the harmonies of choir practice. The familiar hymns lingered in her mind as she began her walk home, humming Amazing Grace under her breath. The setting sun painted long shadows across the cracked sidewalk, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming dogwood trees. Her comfortable walking shoes tapped a steady rhythm as she made her way down Mason Street. She'd walked this route hundreds of times over the decades, watching the neighborhood change around her while she remained constant, like the sturdy oak tree in her front yard. The thought of home brought a small smile to her weathered face. Her garden would need checking. The tomato seedlings she'd planted last week were just starting to peek through the soil. James would have been proud of how she'd kept up their home. Her late husband had built that house with his own hands back in '62, working evenings and weekends until every board was perfect. "A man's home is his castle," he used to say, "and my queen deserves nothing less." Loretta touched the gold wedding band she still wore, remembering his calloused hands and determined spirit. The streetlights began flickering on, one by one, casting pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalk. Most folks were home having dinner by now, but Loretta enjoyed these quiet moments. The solitude gave her time to think, to pray, to remember. Her arthritic knee ached a bit, but she kept her pace steady. Just 3 more blocks to go. The sound of an engine growling behind her broke through her peaceful reverie. Music blasted suddenly, harsh, angry sounds that made her shoulders tense. The truck's headlights swept across her back, and she instinctively moved closer to the edge of the sidewalk. But instead of passing by, the vehicle swerved toward her, tires screeching against the asphalt. Her heart jumped into her throat as the truck stopped. Car doors slammed, and heavy boots hit the pavement. Before she could turn around fully, rough hands grabbed her shoulders. 3 men towered over her, their faces hidden behind Halloween masks that twisted their features into grotesque sneers. "Well, look what we got here," one of them drawled, his voice muffled but dripping with malice. The smell of beer wafted from behind his mask. Loretta's legs trembled, but she lifted her chin. "I'm just heading home," she said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. "I don't want any trouble." They laughed. Ugly, cruel sounds that echoed off the nearby houses. The largest man shoved her hard, sending her sprawling onto the ground. Her palms scraped against the concrete, and pain shot through her hip as she landed. Her cloth bag spilled open, scattering her choir music across the sidewalk. "This is our neighborhood, you old crow," another man spat, kicking her sheet music into the gutter. "Always has been." The third man had already moved to her yard, knocking over the ceramic flower pots she'd painted herself. Petunias and soil scattered across the grass. The sound of each pot shattering sent sharp pains through her chest, worse than the throbbing in her hands and hip. A spray can hissed in the darkness. The acrid smell of paint filled the air as one of them defaced her white picket fence. The fence James had repainted every spring until the day he died. Even in the dim light, she could make out the hateful words they were leaving behind. "Read it and weep," one taunted, shaking the spray can. That's what happens to people who don't know their place. Loretta tried to push herself up, but her arms shook too much to support her weight. Years of arthritis made her joints betray her when she needed them most. One of the men noticed her struggle and laughed, deliberately stepping on her fingers as he walked past. "Look at her squirm," he said. "Like a bug that needs squashing." They circled her like wolves, their boots scuffing the pavement. More cruel words rained down, each one designed to strip away her dignity, to make her feel small and afraid. But somewhere beneath the fear, a familiar ember of defiance glowed. She'd lived through worse than these cowards in masks. She'd seen attack dogs and fire hoses, survived cross-burnings and midnight phone calls. The men kicked more dirt toward her, some of it landing in her gray hair. Their laughter echoed off the houses, but not a single porch light came on. No doors opened. No one came to help. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they tired of their sport. The truck's engine roared back to life, tires squealing as they peeled away into the night. Their music faded slowly, leaving behind only the sound of crickets and Loretta's ragged breathing. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body as she struggled to her feet. Her right arm throbbed where she'd landed on it, and she could feel blood trickling from her scraped palms. Clutching her arm close to her chest, she shuffled toward her front door, each step careful and measured. Inside her kitchen, the familiar walls that had witnessed so much of her life seemed to close in around her. Her hands shook as she lowered herself into the chair where James used to read his morning paper. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking each moment as she sat there, willing herself not to cry. These men thought they could break her spirit with their hatred and violence. But they didn't know about the steel in her spine, forged through decades of surviving exactly this kind of cruelty. Still, her fingers trembled as she reached for the telephone, knowing the call she needed to make. The kitchen clock showed just past 9 when Loretta picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the familiar number. Each ring seemed to stretch for an eternity before she heard the click of someone answering. "Hello?" Daniel's voice was tired but warm, carrying the crisp professional tone he'd developed since moving to Washington. "Daniel?" Loretta tried to keep her voice steady. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, baby." "Never too busy for you, Mama. Just got home from the office." "Everything okay?" There was a rustling sound as he settled into what she knew was his favorite leather armchair, the one she'd helped him pick out when he first moved to D.C. Loretta pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. "Oh, I'm fine. Just wanted to hear your voice is all." She winced as pain shot through her arm when she shifted in her chair. But Daniel knew his mother too well. "Mama, what's wrong? I can hear something's not right." "It's nothing serious, really." She glanced down at her scraped palms, still dotted with tiny pieces of gravel. "Just had a little trouble on my way home from choir practice." "What kind of trouble?" His voice sharpened slightly. Loretta sighed, knowing she couldn't hide it from him. "Some men. They were waiting on Mason Street. They pushed me down, broke my flower pots." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "They spray-painted some ugly words on the fence your daddy built." "They what?" Daniel's tone turned to ice. "Are you hurt? Did you call the police?" "Just some scrapes and bruises. My arm's a bit sore, but—" "Mama, tell me everything. Now." It wasn't a request. The dam finally broke. Loretta's voice shook as she described the attack. The masks, the cruel laughter, the boots stepping on her fingers. With each detail, she could hear Daniel's breathing getting heavier on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry to bother you with this," she said quickly. "I know you're busy with your office work and all." "Stop that right now," Daniel cut in. "You did exactly right calling me. I'm coming down there tonight." "Oh, baby, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Lock all your doors and windows. Call Sister Martha next door to check on you. I'll be there by morning. Daniel, it's a long drive from Washington. I mean it, Mama. Don't argue with me on this one. His voice softened. Get some rest. I love you. I love you too, baby. Drive careful. After hanging up, Daniel sat perfectly still for a long moment, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. Then he moved with swift purpose to his home office. The bottom drawer of his desk opened smoothly, revealing his FBI credentials and badge. He ran his fingers over the gold shield. Senior Special Agent, Civil Rights Division, specializing in domestic terrorism and hate group networks. His go bag was already packed, a habit from years of sudden deployments to crime scenes across the country. He added his laptop, case files, and extra ammunition for his service weapon. The Glock 23 went into his shoulder holster, familiar and heavy against his ribs. In his bedroom closet, behind the neat rows of suits and ties, he pulled out a Kevlar vest. It wasn't standard procedure for visiting his mother, but something in his gut told him he'd need it. 15 years of investigating hate crimes had taught him to trust those instincts. Daniel's movements were controlled and precise as he gathered his things, but inside, rage simmered. He'd seen too many cases start exactly like this. Harassment escalating to violence, local police looking the other way, victims left vulnerable and alone. But this time, it was personal. This time, they'd attacked his mother. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from his supervisor. Call me when you can. Daniel had already sent a brief message requesting emergency leave, citing a family situation. He'd give more details later, once he had assessed the scene himself. The digital clock on his nightstand read 9:47 p.m. as he shouldered his bags. The drive would take at least 7 hours, longer if he hit traffic around Richmond. But he'd make it by dawn. Meanwhile, in her modest bedroom, Loretta knelt beside her bed, her aching joints protesting the familiar position. The quilt beneath her folded hands was one she'd made herself, each patch holding memories of happier times. Lord, she whispered, watch over my boy as he travels. Keep him safe on these dark roads. She paused, struggling with her next words. And help me find forgiveness in my heart for those men. Though right now, I'm finding it mighty hard. Her nightgown was soft against the scrapes on her knees as she continued her prayers. The old house creaked and settled around her, its familiar sounds usually comforting, but now making her jump at every pop and groan of the floorboards. Sister Martha from next door had come over as soon as Loretta called, bringing arnica gel for the bruises and staying until Loretta had checked every lock twice. But now, alone in the growing darkness, the memory of those masked faces loomed large in her mind. Still, she kept praying, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. She prayed for peace, for protection, for justice. Most of all, she prayed for her son, not knowing that at that very moment, Daniel was loading his FBI-issued weapon and stepping out into the cool Washington night. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Daniel's black SUV rolled into town. Every familiar landmark seemed different now, tainted by what had happened to his mother. The old ice cream parlor where he'd spent summer afternoons, the courthouse steps where his father had taught him about justice, the park where he'd played basketball. All of it felt darker, more threatening. He slowed near Thompson's Hardware, remembering how Mr. Thompson used to slip him candy when he'd visit with his dad. Now the store windows displayed Confederate flag merchandise alongside fishing gear. His FBI training kicked in, noting details, security cameras, sight lines, possible gathering spots. The neighborhoods hadn't changed much. Same neat rows of houses, same carefully trimmed lawns. But now Daniel noticed things his childhood self had missed. How the black family's homes were clustered together. How the nicest properties all belonged to white residents. The division wasn't by chance. His mother's street looked peaceful in the morning light. Too peaceful. Curtains twitched in windows as he parked. Mrs. Wilson next door, who'd lived there 30 years, quickly turned away when he looked over. The message was clear. They'd seen what happened, but no one had helped. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he saw the fence. Even from here, the spray-painted slurs were visible, ugly black letters defacing the white pickets his father had maintained so carefully. He took several deep breaths, letting his training override his anger. Document everything. Build the case. Make it stick. He grabbed his phone and took initial photos from the street, capturing the full scene. The broken flower pots still lay scattered across the yard. Dirt spilled across the walkway. More evidence. More fuel for his rage. The screen door creaked as Loretta stepped onto the porch. She wore her Sunday dress, as if dressing up could armor her against what had happened. "Daniel," she called softly, "come on in before your coffee gets cold." His throat tightened as he saw her face clearly. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, a purple stain against her brown skin. She held herself carefully, favoring her right side. But her head was high, her dignity intact. "Mama," he said, climbing the steps. He hugged her gently, noting how she winced slightly despite his care. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She patted his cheek. "Come inside first. Everything's better with coffee and biscuits." The kitchen was warm and bright, smelling of coffee and fresh-baked bread. Loretta had always fought darkness with light, hate with love. 2 cups sat ready on the checked tablecloth, steam rising in the morning sun. "Your arm's bothering you," Daniel said, watching her pour coffee. "We should get it checked out." "It's just sore, nothing broken." She sat across from him, her movements careful but determined. "I've had worse." "What do you mean, worse? Has this happened before?" Loretta sighed, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Not like last night, but there's been incidents. Started small at first. Missing mail. Garbage dumped in the yard. Then the phone calls started." "How long?" Daniel's voice was tight. "Few months now. Since they started that new heritage group at the old Mason Lodge." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't want to worry you." "Mama, you should have told me." He reached across the table, took her hand. "Show me your phone. I need to see those calls." She pulled out an old flip phone. Daniel scrolled through the call history, noting times and patterns. "These numbers, they're all local?" "Most of them. Some showed up as private." She touched the bruise on her cheek absently. "I know their voices, even when they try to hide them. Sons and grandsons of the same families that gave your daddy trouble back in the day." Daniel's jaw clenched. He remembered the stories, how his father had stood up to the Klan in the 60s, refused to be driven out of town. Now history was repeating itself. "The police," he started. "Won't help," Loretta cut in. "Sheriff Henderson's boy was one of them last night." I recognized his laugh. Daniel stood, needing to move. He walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood. More curtains twitched, more eyes watching, more people choosing silence over justice. "I stayed strong," Loretta said quietly behind him, "like your daddy would have wanted. Didn't let them see me afraid." He turned back to her, saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. She'd survived segregation, seen the worst of human hatred, yet kept her grace. But she shouldn't have to be strong alone. Moving to the front door, Daniel stepped onto the porch. The morning had warmed, but he felt cold as he stared at the spray-painted words. Each letter was a testament to hate's persistence, to the poison still running through his hometown's veins. His jaw set as he studied the crude symbols, the threats, the slurs. His mother's quiet dignity deserved better than this. His father's memory deserved better. The badge in his pocket meant something. It meant no one was above the law, not even good old boys playing at terror in the night. Daniel pulled his SUV into town, parking near Mason's Diner where locals gathered for afternoon coffee. He'd changed from his usual suit into jeans and a faded University of Georgia t-shirt, the costume of a hometown boy back for a visit. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and grease, unchanged since his childhood. "Well, if it ain't little Danny Jennings," May, the elderly waitress, called out. Her smile was genuine, one of the few who'd always been kind to his family. "Your mama told me you were visiting. Good to see you, Miss May." Daniel settled at the counter, positioning himself near two men in work clothes who were talking loudly over plates of apple pie. "Heard that old woman finally got what was coming," one said, his voice carrying deliberately. He wore a faded red baseball cap and had grease-stained hands, thinking she owns that street like it's her private garden show. His companion, younger and wearing a mechanic's shirt with Brad stitched on it, snickered. "Should have seen her face when she hit the ground. Bet she ain't feeling so high and mighty now." Daniel's hand tightened around his coffee cup, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of undercover work had taught him patience. He watched their reflection in the chrome napkin holder, memorizing faces. "Truck ran real smooth last night, Tommy," Brad continued, quieter but still audible. "That new muffler you put on made it nice and quiet for night work." "Speaking of work," Tommy stood, dropping cash on the table. "Gotta get back to the shop. Got a blue F-150 waiting on brake work." Daniel noted the detail, Tommy's auto repair. He'd passed it on the way into town. The men swaggered out, climbing into a lifted black Dodge Ram with custom wheels and Confederate flag stickers. Daniel committed the plate number to memory. After finishing his coffee, he drove to the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with peeling paint. Inside, the air conditioning hummed weakly against the afternoon heat. A dispatcher looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" "Need to speak with Sheriff Cutter about a vandalism case," Daniel said pleasantly. "He's in his office." She jerked her thumb toward a door marked Sheriff Roy Cutter in gold letters. The sheriff sat behind a cluttered desk, his bulk straining his tan uniform. Family photos lined the walls, hunting trips, fishing expeditions, generations of Cutters in law enforcement. Daniel noticed a particular photo, Roy Cutter as a young deputy, standing proudly beside his father, the previous sheriff. "What can I do for you?" Cutter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel Jennings, sir." He kept his tone respectful. "Hear about what happened to my mother last night." "Ah, yes, the incident." Cutter leaned back, chair creaking. "Unfortunate business." "More than unfortunate. She was assaulted, her property vandalized with racial slurs." "Boys will be boys," Cutter shrugged. "Probably just some kids blowing off steam." "Kids?" Daniel's voice hardened slightly. "I was at Mason's Diner just now. Overheard two grown men bragging about attacking an elderly woman. One works at Tommy's Auto Repair." "Tommy's good people," Cutter said dismissively. "Known him since he was knee-high. Besides, your mama can't identify who did it, being dark and all. Probably just imagined the whole thing." Daniel placed photos from his phone on the desk. The spray-painted fence, the bruises on his mother's face. "This look imagined to you?" Cutter barely glanced at them. "Could have happened any time. Could have done it herself for attention." His smirk grew more pronounced. "Some folks just like stirring up trouble where there ain't none." The implication hung in the air like poison. Daniel recognized the look in Cutter's eyes, the same look he'd seen in dozens of investigations. The smug certainty of power, of knowing the system would protect its own. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Daniel said evenly. "Write it up if you want." Cutter gestured to a stack of forms. "But between us, Your mama might want to consider moving somewhere more suitable. City folks tend to fit in better with their own kind. Daniel filled out the form methodically, knowing it would disappear into a drawer, never to be seen again. He noted Cutter watching him, probably wondering if this would be the end of it. The sheriff's confidence was a weapon. He expected no consequences, no justice. Walking to his car, Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Agent Sarah Martinez had worked with him on dozens of hate crime cases. She answered on the second ring. "How's your mama?" she asked without preamble. Daniel looked back at the sheriff's office, where Cutter stood in the window watching him leave. "The rot goes deeper than I thought," he said quietly. The lazy afternoon heat wrapped around him as he climbed into his SUV. Main Street dozed in the sun, looking peaceful and ordinary. But beneath the surface, hatred festered like a wound, protected by badges and tradition, passed down through generations. His mother's bruises were just the latest symptom of a disease that had never really gone away. He started the engine, watching Sheriff Cutter's reflection grow smaller in his rearview mirror. The man's dismissive smirk stayed with him, not just the arrogance of it, but the certainty. Cutter thought he was untouchable, protected by a system built to shield men like him. The road stretched out ahead as Daniel drove, his mind already mapping connections, gathering threads. His mother's attack wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern, a continuation of old hatreds wearing new masks. But patterns could be traced, documented, exposed. Evening settled over Loretta's house like a heavy blanket. Daniel stood at the kitchen window, scanning the darkening yard, while his mother stirred a pot of her famous butter beans on the stove. The familiar smell of cornbread baking filled the air, but it couldn't mask the tension. "You don't have to keep watching, baby," Loretta said, her voice gentle. "Come help me set the table." Daniel reluctantly moved away from the window, but his eyes kept darting to the shadows outside. He'd positioned his SUV where he could see any approaching vehicles and set up discreet security cameras earlier, though he hadn't told his mother about those. "Just being careful, Mama." He pulled plates from the cabinet, the same blue willow pattern dishes she'd had his entire life. Some had small chips now, like battle scars from decades of family meals. Loretta pulled the golden cornbread from the oven, its aroma filling the kitchen with warmth. "Reminds me of when your daddy was alive," she said, setting it on a cooling rack. "Times weren't so different then, you know?" Daniel paused in laying out the silverware. "What do you mean?" "Oh, we had our share of trouble." She spooned butter beans into a serving bowl, steam rising in the kitchen's yellow light. "Summer of '82, some men didn't like that your daddy got promoted at the factory." First black foreman they'd ever had. She settled into her chair at the kitchen table, her movements slower and stiffer than Daniel remembered. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple. "They came by one night," she continued. "Threw bottles at the house, yelled awful things. But your daddy, he just stood on that porch, calm as could be. Didn't say a word. Just stood there until they ran out of bottles and courage." Daniel sat beside her, the memory of his father's quiet strength filling the space between them. "I remember him teaching me that standing up doesn't always mean fighting back." "That's right." Loretta reached for his hand, her skin papery, but her grip still firm. "He said dignity was something nobody could take unless you gave it away." They bowed their heads as Loretta said, "Grace," her voice steady despite everything. Daniel watched her face in the soft light, the lines around her eyes deeper than he remembered, but that same unwavering determination he'd always known. "Your daddy would be proud of you," she said, as they began to eat. "Following your own path, helping people who need it. I just wish I'd known what was happening here sooner." Daniel broke off a piece of cornbread, still warm. "Why didn't you tell me about the harassment?" Loretta sighed, stirring her beans. "You have your own life, your own battles. A mama doesn't want to burden her children. You're never a burden, Mama. Bright headlights suddenly swept across the kitchen windows, flooding the room with harsh light. Daniel was on his feet instantly, but before he could move, there was a sharp crack of breaking glass. A rock crashed through the window, sending shards skittering across the linoleum floor. "Get down!" Daniel pushed his mother toward the floor, shielding her as engine noise roared past the house. He caught a glimpse of taillights disappearing into the darkness. When the sound faded, Daniel carefully helped Loretta up. She was shaking, but her jaw was set firm. He retrieved the rock from where it had landed near the stove. A piece of paper was wrapped around it, secured with a rubber band. Daniel carefully unfolded the note. The message was typed in bold letters. "Leave or burn." "Cowards," Loretta whispered, staring at the broken window. Just like their daddies and their granddaddies before them. Daniel pulled out his phone to photograph the rock and note. More evidence. Glass crunched under his shoes as he checked the security cameras he'd installed. The truck had been moving too fast for a clear shot of the license plate. "We should get you somewhere safe," he said, turning back to his mother. "Just until I can—" "No." Loretta's voice was quiet but iron hard. "This is my home. Your daddy built it with his own hands, put in every nail, every board. I watched him do it." She looked around the kitchen, at the familiar walls that held 40 years of memories. "I'm not leaving." Daniel sat back down beside her, taking her hand in his. The kitchen felt different now, the broken window letting in the night air, their dinner getting cold on the table. But his mother's grip was steady, her spine straight despite her trembling. "Your daddy stood his ground," she said softly. "Now it's our turn." Looking at her face in the dim light, Daniel saw past the fear to the steel beneath. He thought of all she'd endured, all she'd survived, the quiet dignity she maintained even now, with glass on her kitchen floor and threats in the dark. "Then they'll have to go through me," he whispered, squeezing her hand. They sat together at the kitchen table, mother and son, while the night pressed against the broken window and their cooling dinner waited forgotten. In the distance, a dog barked, and somewhere a car door slammed. But in that moment, in the warm circle of lamplight, they held their ground together, just as his father had taught them. The morning sun cast long shadows across Loretta's kitchen table, where Daniel sat surrounded by handwritten notes and his laptop. Through the window, now covered with a piece of plywood until repairs could be made, he watched his mother in her garden. She wore her wide-brimmed sun hat, carefully tending to her roses, as if nothing had happened. Daniel's jaw tightened as he noticed how she favored her right arm, still sore from being pushed down. But there she was, pruning and weeding, refusing to hide inside. Her quiet defiance made his chest ache with pride and worry. He turned back to his notes, spread across the worn tablecloth. Names and connections sprawled across the pages in his precise handwriting. At the center was Troy Cutter, the sheriff's son. Daniel had recognized his voice at the diner yesterday, though he'd pretended not to notice. "Little Troy," Daniel muttered, remembering a mean-spirited teenager who'd grown into an even meaner adult. He drew a line connecting Troy to his father, Sheriff Roy Cutter, adding notes about the sheriff's dismissive response to the vandalism report. The screen of his laptop showed social media posts he'd been combing through. Troy Cutter's public profile was full of thinly veiled racist comments and photos of his jacked-up truck, the same one Daniel had seen speeding away last night. In one picture, Troy stood proudly next to Mayor Wilson's aide, Blake Thompson, both wearing hunting gear and holding rifles. Daniel added Thompson's name to his chart, drawing another connection. The mayor's office had repeatedly blocked attempts to investigate hate crimes in the county. Now he was starting to understand why. Through the window, he heard Loretta humming an old gospel song as she worked. the same song she'd been singing at choir practice before the attack. His pen pressed harder into the paper. "Would you like some tea, baby?" Loretta called from the garden. "It's getting warm out here." "I'll make it, Mama," Daniel replied, standing up. "You stay with your roses." In the kitchen, he filled the kettle and pulled 2 glasses from the cabinet. While the water heated, he heard the rumble of a familiar engine. Moving to the window, he watched Troy Cutter's truck cruise slowly past the house. The driver made no attempt to hide his face this time, just stared straight at Loretta in her garden. Daniel's hand instinctively moved toward where his service weapon would usually be, but he forced himself to remain still. Not yet. He needed more evidence. Loretta didn't even look up as the truck passed. She just kept pruning her roses, humming her hymn. The truck accelerated away, leaving a cloud of dust. Daniel pulled out his phone and checked the security camera feed. The image of Troy's truck was clear, including the custom modifications and the Confederate flag sticker in the back window. He saved the footage and added it to his growing file. The kettle whistled, and Daniel prepared the tea, sweet for his mother, unsweetened for himself. He brought both glasses outside, setting them on the small table beside Loretta's garden chair. "Thank you, baby," she said, taking a sip. "These roses need extra attention after all that rain we had." Daniel nodded, but his mind was already working on his next move. "I need to run into town for a bit, Mama. Will you be okay?" "I've been okay for 76 years, she replied with a small smile. "Go do what you need to do." 20 minutes later, Daniel parked his SUV across from the sheriff's office, positioning himself with a clear view of the parking lot. He didn't have to wait long. Troy Cutter's truck pulled in, parking in a spot marked Sheriff's Personnel Only. Daniel raised his camera, using the telephoto lens to capture clear shots of Troy emerging from the truck. The young man swaggered into the building, clearly feeling untouchable under his father's protection. Daniel took more photos of the truck, documenting every identifying detail. A few minutes later, Blake Thompson's car arrived. The mayor's aide hurried into the sheriff's office, looking nervous. Daniel photographed him too, adding to his growing collection of evidence. Back at home, Daniel created a new folder on his encrypted laptop. He labeled it Domestic Terror Threat and began organizing his findings. Photos of Troy's truck, screenshots of social media posts, and his hand-drawn connection chart all went into the file. He added timestamps and GPS coordinates to each piece of evidence, building the case methodically. The sound of Loretta's humming drifted in through the window again. Daniel glanced up to see her deadheading spent blooms from her rose bushes. A new bud was forming where vandals had broken a branch. Like his mother, it refused to be destroyed. He turned back to his laptop, creating subfolders for each suspect. Under Troy Cutter's name went the photos from this morning and the security camera footage. Under Blake Thompson's went documentation of the mayor's office's pattern of obstruction. Each piece of evidence was another thread in the web he was quietly weaving. Daniel saved everything to his secure FBI server, ensuring the evidence was safely backed up. Then he closed the laptop and tucked his notes into the folder marked Domestic Terror Threat. The title wasn't just procedural. He'd seen enough in his career to recognize the warning signs of organized hate groups. This wasn't random harassment. It was systematic intimidation, with deep roots in the local power structure. He placed the folder in his briefcase, next to his badge. The same badge that gave him the authority these small-town bullies thought they had. But unlike them, he knew how to use his power properly, methodically, legally, and with purpose. The wooden steps of First Baptist Church creaked under Daniel's feet as he climbed to the pastor's office. The familiar smell of old hymnals and lemon polish brought back memories of Sunday school lessons and choir practice. He knocked on the door marked Reverend Paul Harris. "Come in, son," called a warm voice. Daniel entered to find Reverend Harris exactly as he remembered, tall and dignified in his pressed white shirt. though his hair had gone completely gray. The pastor's eyes lit up with recognition. "Daniel Jennings, the Lord brings you back to us." Reverend Harris stood and embraced him. "I heard about what happened to your mama. My heart is heavy. That's why I'm here, Reverend." Daniel sat in the worn leather chair across from the desk. "I need your help." Reverend Harris leaned forward, folding his hands. "Tell me everything." Daniel explained the attacks, the sheriff's dismissal, and his own role at the FBI, watching the pastor's expression grow more concerned with each detail. "Lord, have mercy," Reverend Harris murmured, "but it doesn't surprise me. Things have gotten worse here lately, not better. More threats, more intimidation." He stood and walked to his window, looking out at the church's small parking lot. "Just last month, they tried to stop our voter registration drive. That's when I met Angela." "Angela?" "Angela Morris, young lawyer who moved back home after making a name for herself in Atlanta. She's been fighting voter suppression cases here in the county." He checked his watch. "In fact, she should be here any minute for our meeting about the church's legal aid program." As if on cue, a knock sounded at the door. A woman in her early 30s entered, wearing a crisp blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes were sharp and alert. "Angela, perfect timing," Reverend Harris said. "This is Daniel Jennings. His mother, Loretta, was attacked by the same people we've been dealing with." Angela's handshake was firm. "I heard about that. I'm so sorry." She sat down, setting her briefcase beside her. The sheriff's office claimed there wasn't enough evidence to investigate. "The sheriff's son was one of the attackers," Daniel said quietly. Angela's eyes narrowed. "That explains a lot." She pulled out a legal pad. "I've been documenting similar incidents. Threats against black business owners, vandalism at minority churches, mysterious fires at homes where we held voter registration events. What Angela's not saying," Reverend Harris added, "is that she's received threats herself. But she won't back down." "Can't afford to," Angela replied. "My grandmother marched for voting rights on these same streets. I won't let them undo all that progress." Daniel studied them both. The young lawyer's determination, the pastor's steady wisdom. Here were allies who understood what was at stake. "I need to be careful how I proceed," Daniel explained. "This is potentially part of a larger investigation. Everything has to be by the book." "Of course," Angela nodded. "I can help document incidents, gather statements from victims who've been afraid to come forward, all properly witnessed and notarized. And I can be a point of contact," Reverend Harris added. "People trust the church. They'll tell me things they won't tell law enforcement." "But discretion is essential," Daniel emphasized. "If the wrong people find out I'm FBI, it could compromise everything." "Your secret is safe," Reverend Harris assured him. "We know how to be careful." Angela pulled out her business card and wrote a number on the back. "This is my personal cell. Call any time, day or night." They spent the next hour sharing information, Angela's legal cases showing patterns of intimidation, Reverend Harris's list of incidents reported to the church, Daniel's observations about local power structures. Each piece added to the larger picture of organized hatred hiding behind badges and offices. "One more thing," Daniel said as they wrapped up. "My mother. She's vulnerable out there alone when I'm working. Could some church members—" "Say no more," Reverend Harris smiled. "We'll set up a rotation. Someone will always be nearby, watching out for her. Sister Loretta won't even notice." "Thank you." Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. "Both of you. We're in this together," Angela said firmly. "Your mother's case could be the key to exposing everything. We just have to build it carefully." The sun was setting when Daniel pulled into his mother's driveway. Loretta sat on her porch in the fading light, a shawl around her shoulders. The broken window above had been patched, but the ugly spray paint still marked her fence. "How was your day, baby?" she asked as he climbed the steps. Daniel sat beside her in the other rocking chair. "I met with Reverend Harris and a lawyer named Angela Morris." "Angela? Sweet girl. Does good work." Loretta rocked slowly. "They're going to help?" "Yes, Mama. But I need you to know, things might get worse before they get better. These people, when they feel threatened, they lash out harder." Loretta reached over and patted his hand. "I'm not afraid, Daniel. The Lord didn't bring me this far to falter now." She gazed out at her garden, where the roses still bloomed despite their rough treatment. "And I'm not alone anymore." "No, Mama." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You're not alone at all." The evening air had grown heavy with humidity, as crickets chirped their nightly chorus. Inside Loretta's living room, a single lamp cast a warm glow over her weathered Bible. Her fingers traced the familiar verses of Psalms, finding comfort in ancient words of protection and deliverance. Daniel stood at the kitchen window, watching his mother read while he dried the dinner dishes. The peaceful scene made his jaw clench, knowing what lurked beyond these walls, the hatred that threatened this simple moment. He set down the dish towel. "Just going to check the car, Mama," he called softly. "Make sure everything's locked up." Loretta nodded without looking up, her lips moving silently over the scripture. The floor creaked beneath Daniel's careful steps as he moved through the house. The porch light illuminated the front yard in a pale yellow circle. Daniel's FBI-trained eyes scanned the shadows, noting the positions of nearby houses, the line of trees across the street. His hand brushed unconsciously against his concealed weapon as he descended the steps. The night was too quiet. No dogs barking, no distant voices or TV sounds from neighboring homes. Just silence and watching eyes behind drawn curtains. Daniel circled his car slowly, checking underneath with his flashlight, examining the tires and doors for signs of tampering. An engine rumbled in the distance. Daniel straightened, every sense alert. The sound grew louder, accompanied by muffled laughter and music. The bottle arced through the darkness like a meteor, end over end, trailing flame. Daniel's shout of warning was drowned by the crash of breaking glass. Fire exploded across the porch railing, hungry orange tongues licking up the white paint. "Mama!" Daniel sprinted for the garden hose, yanking it free. "Stay inside!" But Loretta was already at the screen door, her Bible clutched to her chest. Her scream pierced the night as another bottle smashed against the house's foundation, spreading liquid fire. Daniel aimed the hose, his hands steadied despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Steam hissed as water met flames. The acrid smell of gasoline and smoke filled his lungs. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of the attack. The familiar truck idling at the corner. Dark figures silhouetted against headlights. Cruel laughter carried on the wind along with a shout. "Burn! Niggers!" Tires squealed as the truck peeled away, leaving only the echo of hatred behind. Daniel kept spraying until every ember was drowned, until black scorch marks were all that remained of the attack. Porch lights clicked on up and down the street. Faces appeared in windows, pale ovals of fear or guilt or morbid curiosity. But no one came out. No one offered help. The silence was broken only by Loretta's ragged breathing and the drip of water from charred wood. Daniel dropped the hose and ran up the steps, gathering his trembling mother into his arms. Her Bible fell forgotten as she clutched at his shirt. "Inside," he ordered gently, guiding her through the door. The living room lamp still glowed peacefully, obscenely normal after the violence outside. He sat Loretta in her favorite chair, checking her for any injuries. "I'm calling the police," he said, reaching for his phone. "They won't come," Loretta whispered. Her voice shook. Not for us. Never for us. Daniel knew she was right, but protocol had to be followed. Evidence had to be documented. He dialed anyway, watching his mother's face in the lamplight. She looked suddenly old, fragile in a way that broke his heart. While he reported the incident to a bored-sounding dispatcher, Daniel's mind was already racing ahead. The truck's direction of escape, the timing of the attack, the familiar sound of one attacker's voice, all pieces fitting into the larger puzzle. But right now, his mother needed him. He knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "I'm here, Mama. I've got you. They're trying to kill me." The words came out as barely a whisper, heavy with the weight of history, of crosses burning and churches bombed, of bodies in rivers and justice denied. After all these years, they still want us dead. Daniel squeezed her hands, feeling the strength in those fingers that had worked so hard, held on so long. "Then, we're going to stop them." His voice carried the full authority of his badge, his training, his righteous anger. But Loretta just shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Your daddy said the same thing. Before..." She couldn't finish. Daniel remembered. How could he forget? His father had stood up to these same families 20 years ago, demanding equal treatment at his construction job. 2 weeks later, his truck's brakes failed on a steep mountain road. The police called it an accident. Everyone knew better. Now these cowards were targeting his mother, thinking she was alone and defenseless. They had no idea they'd just signed their own destruction. Red and blue lights finally flickered through the windows, local police responding with deliberate slowness. Daniel stood, straightening his shirt, sliding back into the role of concerned son rather than federal agent. He couldn't show his hand. Not yet. "Stay here, Mama," he said softly. "Let me handle this." Loretta caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "They're trying to kill me," she repeated, as if saying it again might make sense of such hatred. "Then we're going to stop them." Daniel made it a vow this time, spoken with quiet certainty. He gently removed her hand and walked to the door, ready to play his part in this corrupt system's game. But only for now. Only until he could tear it all down. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the sheriff's office, but it did nothing to warm the chill in Daniel's spine as he walked through the door. He carried a manila folder thick with evidence, photographs of the scorched porch, fragments of the Molotov cocktails in evidence bags, and clear shots of the truck fleeing the scene. Sheriff Cutter sat behind his desk, boots propped up, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. He barely glanced up when Daniel entered. "Well, if it isn't Miss Loretta's boy again," Cutter drawled, closing his knife with a snap. "What brings you by this time?" Daniel placed the folder on the desk with controlled precision. "Someone tried to burn my mother's house down last night. Now, that's a mighty serious accusation." Cutter's tone suggested it was anything but. He flipped through the photos with casual disinterest, pausing only to scratch his chin. "I've got evidence right there," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "The truck matches the one from the other night. Same make, same broken tail light." Cutter held up one of the photos, squinting at it in the sunlight. "Looks like some kids playing with fireworks to me. Probably got a little carried away." "Fireworks don't contain gasoline," Daniel countered, laying out the lab analysis he'd run on the bottle fragments. This was attempted murder. The sheriff's laugh felt like sandpaper on Daniel's nerves. "Your mama always did have a flair for the dramatic. Remember when she claimed someone was stealing from her garden last summer? Turned out to be raccoons." Daniel's hands clenched into fists beneath the desk. "This isn't about garden theft. They're threatening her life." "Now, son," Cutter leaned forward, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "I understand you're upset, but you can't go around accusing decent folks without proper evidence." "Decent folks?" Daniel's voice rose slightly. You mean like your son Troy? The sheriff's face tightened for just a moment before smoothing back into its practiced mask. I'd be real careful about throwing around accusations like that. I've got witnesses who saw his truck in the area, Daniel pressed, and the voice on this recording matches his. He pulled out his phone, playing the captured audio of the attacker's shouts. Cutter's boots hit the floor with a thud. That recording wouldn't hold up in court. Could be anyone. It's enough for a proper investigation, Daniel insisted. Or are you refusing to investigate attacks against a citizen in your jurisdiction? Something ugly flickered across the sheriff's face. His practiced smile slipped, revealing the rot beneath. Listen here, he growled, leaning across the desk. You people never learn when you're not wanted. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Daniel felt his professional mask crack slightly, letting his own cold anger show through. What people would that be, Sheriff? You know exactly what I mean. Cutter's voice dripped with generations of inherited hatred. Your mama's been causing trouble since she moved here with your daddy. Won't take a hint. Won't know her place. Her place is in her home, Daniel said softly, dangerously. The home my father built. The home your son and his friends tried to burn down. Cutter stood, using his height to loom over the desk. You got no proof of that. And even if you did, ain't no judge in this county gonna take the word of a... He caught himself, but the slur hung unspoken between them. Daniel rose slowly to meet his gaze. So, that's how it is? The law doesn't apply when the victim is black? The law is whatever I say it is in this county, Cutter sneered. Been that way for generations. Your kind would do well to remember that. Everything clicked into place for Daniel. The dismissed complaints, the ignored evidence, the pattern of harassment. Cutter wasn't just failing to investigate. He was actively protecting the perpetrators, probably helping coordinate the attacks. This conversation has been very enlightening, Sheriff, Daniel said, gathering his evidence folder. His tone was professionally neutral, but his eyes burned with purpose. That a threat? Cutter's hand drifted toward his gun belt. Just an observation. Daniel moved toward the door, then paused. By the way, how is Troy's probation going? After that assault charge last year? Color drained from Cutter's face. How did you... Amazing what you can find in public records, Daniel said mildly. Would be a shame if he violated it. Federal charges tend to stick, unlike local ones. He left Cutter sputtering behind his desk and walked calmly to his car. Only when he was safely inside did he allow his hands to shake with suppressed fury. The steering wheel creaked under his grip as he drove back toward Loretta's house. The bright morning had turned gray, clouds gathering overhead, like the darkness in Daniel's thoughts. Every conversation, every threat, every dismissive gesture from Cutter played back in his mind. This wasn't just about one attack anymore. This was about decades of systematic oppression, violence protected by badges and banked by silence. He pulled into Loretta's driveway, noting the fresh scorch marks on her porch. Taking out his phone, he dialed a familiar number. Jenkins, his FBI supervisor answered on the second ring. Daniel watched a neighbor quickly close their curtains as he spoke. Sir, I'm going to need authorization for a covert sting. The morning sun cast long shadows across Loretta's driveway as Daniel adjusted the hidden camera in his car's dashboard. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking angles and connections while keeping one eye on the street. 2 days had passed since his confrontation with Sheriff Cutter, and the tension in the neighborhood felt like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. Through the kitchen window he could see Loretta moving with purpose, her hands deep in pie dough. The sweet scent of apples and cinnamon drifted out to where he worked. She'd insisted on baking for the church fundraiser despite everything, saying evil wouldn't stop her from doing good. Just like Mama, Daniel muttered to himself, a mix of pride and worry in his voice. He tested the camera's feed on his phone, making sure it captured clear images of anyone approaching the house. Inside, Loretta hummed an old gospel tune as she crimped the edges of her third pie. Her movements were precise, practiced over decades of baking. But Daniel noticed how she kept glancing at the windows, how her shoulders tensed at every passing car. "These supplies won't get themselves," Daniel said, stepping into the kitchen. The warmth enveloped him, along with memories of countless childhood moments spent watching his mother bake. "You sure you'll be okay for 30 minutes? Loretta waved her flour-dusted hands. "Lord knows I've survived worse than being alone for half an hour." Her smile was brave, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Besides, I've got my pies to tend to." "Keep the doors locked," Daniel insisted, checking his phone one more time. "I've got the cameras running, and Reverend Harris is just 2 minutes away if you need him." "Go on now," Loretta shooed him toward the door. "Can't have a proper fundraiser without proper supplies." She adjusted her favorite blue shawl around her shoulders, the one Daniel's father had given her on their last anniversary before he passed. Daniel hesitated at the door, something nagging at his instincts. "I'll be quick as I can." "The Lord watches over me," Loretta assured him, turning back to her pies. The kitchen timer dinged, and she moved to check the oven. The screen door creaked shut behind Daniel as he walked to his car. The neighborhood seemed unusually quiet. No children playing, no dogs barking, just the occasional whisper of curtains moving in windows as neighbors peeked out. He'd barely turned the corner when a mud-splattered truck crept down Loretta's street. 3 men in hunting masks jumped out, moving with practiced coordination that spoke of planning rather than impulse. Inside, Loretta heard heavy footsteps on her porch. Before she could reach the phone, the door burst open. She knocked over a cooling rack in her desperate scramble toward the back door, sending an apple pie crashing to the floor. "Help!" she screamed, but rough hands grabbed her. One of the men pressed a cloth against her mouth, while another tied her arms. Her blue shawl slipped from her shoulders as they dragged her toward the door. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson heard the commotion and peeked through her blinds. Her face went pale at the sight of masked men manhandling her elderly neighbor. For a moment, her hand hovered over her phone. Then, with a sharp snap, she closed the blinds and turned away. The truck's engine roared to life. Loretta struggled against the rope binding her wrists, but the men shoved her onto the truck's floor. One of them laughed, a young, cruel sound she recognized from the previous attacks. "Shouldn't have gotten your boy involved, old woman," he sneered through his mask. The truck peeled away, leaving only tire marks and silence. Daniel pulled into the driveway 12 minutes later, arms full of baking supplies. The first warning sign was the door standing wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. His FBI training kicked in instantly. He dropped the bags and drew his weapon, moving cautiously toward the entrance. "Mama!" he called out, scanning for threats. No response. The kitchen was a scene of disruption that told its own story. An overturned cooling rack. Pie fillings splattered across the floor like dark blood. The oven still humming with heat, holding what would be Loretta's last batch of pies for the fundraiser. "No, no, no," Daniel whispered, clearing each room with growing desperation. He found her shawl crumpled by the door, blue fabric twisted as if it had been yanked away in a struggle. Back in the kitchen, steam rose from fresh pies on the counter, their perfectly crimped edges a testament to Loretta's dedication. The timer buzzed insistently, calling for pies that would never be removed. Daniel switched off the oven with trembling hands. He picked up her shawl, pressing the soft fabric between his fingers. It still smelled like her, vanilla extract and the lavender soap she always used. His professional calm cracked for just a moment as he held it to his face. "I swear, I'll bring you back, Mama," he whispered into the empty kitchen, where cooling pies marked the moment when everything changed. The neighbor's curtains twitched again, and Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen Mrs. Peterson's face in the window earlier. She had watched it happen. Done nothing. The same pattern of silent complicity that had protected racists in this town for generations. But this time would be different. This time, the wrong people had started a war. Daniel's fingers flew across his phone screen, pulling up the GPS tracking data he'd secretly installed on Troy Cutter's truck 2 days ago. His hands shook with barely controlled rage, but his FBI training kept his mind sharp and focused. Come on, he muttered, watching the blinking dot move across the digital map. The signal showed the truck had headed north out of town, toward the old logging roads, before stopping abruptly. Likely where they'd switched vehicles. He speed-dialed Angela Morris, the young lawyer who'd been helping gather evidence. "Angela, I need everything you have on property holdings for the Cutter family, especially anything remote." "Already on it," she replied, papers rustling in the background. "Sheriff Cutter's brother owns 3 parcels out past the county line. One of them has an old tobacco barn." Daniel's phone buzzed with another call. Reverend Harris. He switched lines quickly. "Reverend?" "Daniel, I just heard from Brother Marcus." He was driving his delivery route and saw 3 men in masks forcing someone into a different vehicle, a blue van, up by Old Miller Road. They were heading toward the Willow Creek area. Daniel's pulse quickened. Willow Creek was near one of those Cutter properties. "What time exactly?" "About 40 minutes ago." Marcus was too scared to call it in to the sheriff's office, but he knew to tell me. The Reverend's voice grew tight with concern. "Daniel, they were rough with her, but she was fighting back." Pride and fear tangled in Daniel's chest. Of course his mother would fight, just like she'd fought every injustice thrown at her over the years. "I'm going to need your help, Reverend. Can you meet me at the quick stop on Route 16 and bring that map of the old logging roads you mentioned?" "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Reverend Harris promised. "I'm praying for Loretta." Daniel grabbed his tactical vest from the car trunk and strapped it on under his jacket. He checked his service weapon and spare magazines, then pulled out a secure satellite phone. His call to FBI Special Agent Thompson was brief and coded. "Asset compromised, local corruption confirmed. Requesting tactical support at these coordinates." He rattled off the location of the barn. "Maximum deniability needed." "Teams already rolling from the Atlanta office," Thompson replied. "1 hour out. Be careful, Jennings. Don't engage alone if you can help it." The Quick Stop's parking lot was empty, except for Reverend Harris's ancient Buick, when Daniel pulled in. The older man stood waiting with a folded paper map and a thermos of coffee. "Brother Marcus drew the route here," Harris said, spreading the map on Daniel's hood. His finger traced a winding path. "The old Cutter barn is here, deep in the woods. There's a back way in through the logging road." Daniel studied the map intently, memorizing every turn and landmark. "Reverend, I need you to do something else for me. Go to the sheriff's office. Make a big show of filing a missing persons report for my mother. Keep Cutter distracted." "You think he's involved directly?" "I know he is." Daniel's voice was cold. "His son's truck was used in the kidnapping. He's either helping coordinate or looking the other way. Either way, I need him occupied while I move in." The Reverend gripped Daniel's shoulder. "Your daddy would be proud of how you're handling this. He always said justice would come to this town someday." Daniel thought of his father, who'd faced down night riders and burning crosses without flinching, who'd taught him that courage wasn't about not being afraid, it was about doing what's right, despite the fear. "Thank you for everything," Daniel said quietly. "But if this goes bad, get my mother's story out. Make sure people know what happened here." "Nothing's going bad," Harris insisted. "The Lord didn't bring you home just to fail now." Daniel checked his watch. The FBI team would be approaching the county line soon. He needed to scout the location before they arrived, find the best approach routes, confirm his mother was there. The sun was sinking toward the horizon as he drove the back roads, headlights off, using the dying light to navigate. The old logging road was barely more than a track through the woods, branches scraping against his car's sides. Every bump and turn brought back memories. His father teaching him to drive on roads just like this, showing him escape routes in case the clan ever came calling. "Always have a plan," his dad would say. "And always remember, evil folks count on good folks being too scared to fight back." Through the trees, Daniel caught glimpses of the old barn's dark shape against the darkening sky. He killed the engine and coasted to a stop, using natural cover to hide his vehicle. His heart pounded against his tactical vest as he checked his weapons one final time. A faint light flickered inside the barn, probably lanterns, since the building had no electricity. He could make out two vehicles parked behind it. The blue van from Brother Marcus's description, and a newer pickup truck he recognized as belonging to one of Mayor Wilson's campaign donors. Through his scope, he counted 3 armed men patrolling outside. Their casual postures suggested they felt safe, hidden out here where they'd terrorized black folks for generations. They had no idea a trained federal agent was watching, or that a tactical team was inbound. Daniel touched the photo of his parents he kept in his vest pocket, his father standing proud in his Sunday suit, his mother beaming in her blue shawl, the same shawl now lying crumpled on her kitchen floor. "I'm coming, Mama," he whispered, setting up his night vision equipment as the last rays of sun faded from the sky. "Just hold on a little longer." Through his night vision goggles, Daniel watched the old barn's interior through gaps in the weathered boards. His stomach churned at the scene inside. Loretta sat bound to a wooden chair under harsh battery-powered lanterns, her chin lifted defiantly, despite the bruise darkening her cheek. Around her, 5 men wearing makeshift white robes paced like hungry wolves. Sheriff Cutter stood near Loretta, his uniform badge gleaming dully in the lantern light. He'd shed his professional mask completely, revealing the hatred beneath. His son Troy strutted nearby, fingering a length of rope threateningly. "You people never learn," Cutter was saying, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "This town has traditions, ways things are supposed to be. Your kind pushing for change, acting uppity. It stops now." "The only thing stopping," Loretta replied clearly, "is your reign of terror." Even tied up, she radiated dignity. Troy stepped forward and raised his hand, but Cutter caught his arm. "Not yet, boy. She needs to hear the message first." He turned back to Loretta. "Next week's rally will remind everyone who really runs things here. 500 of our brothers coming from 3 states. Time to put fear back in their hearts." Daniel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about terrorizing his mother. They were planning something much bigger. He touched his radio, whispering coordinates to the FBI team moving into position around the barn. Through the gaps, he could see more men arriving, carrying torches and crude weapons. His count reached 15 hostiles. Among them, he recognized faces from town: the mayor's brother-in-law, 2 deputies, the high school football coach. The rot really did run deep. "Once we're done here," Cutter continued, "we'll make an example of that new black lawyer, too. Then the voter drives stop. The protests stop. Everything goes back to normal." "Your kind of normal died a long time ago," Loretta said softly. "My husband fought it. My son fights it. You can't stop change." Troy backhanded her hard. Daniel's finger tightened on his trigger, but he forced himself to wait. Just a few more minutes until the team was in position. "Your precious son," Troy sneered. "The big shot who came home to save Mama. Where is he now?" He leaned close to Loretta's face. "Running scared, I bet. Just like his daddy should have." The radio in Daniel's ear crackled. "Teams in position. Execute on your mark." He took a deep breath, remembering his father's words. Evil counts on good folks being scared. Not tonight. Not ever again. Daniel triggered the signal. Flashbangs burst through the windows as FBI agents crashed through every entrance. FBI. Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them! The barn erupted in chaos. Daniel burst through the side door, weapon trained. Through the smoke and strobing lights, he saw white-robed figures scrambling. Some reached for weapons but dropped them as agents swarmed in with rifles raised. Troy tried to run but caught a taser in the back. He went down screaming. 2 agents pinned him as he thrashed. Sheriff Cutter reached for his service weapon. "Federal agents! Drop it!" Daniel shouted. When Cutter swung the gun toward him, Daniel double-tapped him in the shoulder. The sheriff collapsed, clutching his arm and howling. "You can't do this!" Cutter screamed as agents cuffed him. "This is my town, my county." "Not anymore," Daniel said coldly, watching him dragged away. More agents poured in, securing suspects and evidence. Daniel rushed to Loretta, holstering his weapon to cut her bonds. Her wrists were raw from the ropes, but her eyes blazed with triumph. "I knew you'd come," she whispered through tears, touching his face. "Just like your daddy taught you. Stand up to evil." Daniel helped her gently to her feet, supporting her as she swayed. "Are you hurt, Mama? Do you need medical?" "Just bruised, baby. Nothing that won't heal." She looked around at the chaos. The proud sheriff and his son face down in handcuffs, their conspirators being led away in restraints. "But I don't think their pride will heal so easy." An agent approached with evidence bags full of documents. "Sir, we found detailed plans for next week. Names, numbers, weapons caches. This is bigger than we thought." "Get it all to the task force," Daniel ordered. "I want every connection mapped, every conspirator identified." He turned to his mother. "Think you're up for giving a statement? We need to do this by the book." Loretta straightened her dress, wiped her eyes, and nodded firmly. "I'll tell everything. It's time all their secrets saw daylight." As agents processed the scene, more evidence emerged. Membership lists, financial records, plans for intimidation campaigns against black voters and civil rights workers. The barn that had housed decades of hatred was yielding up its poison. Through it all, Loretta sat with quiet strength, answering questions clearly and precisely. She identified faces, recalled threats, pieced together the network of corruption that had protected these men for so long. Daniel watched her with fierce pride, remembering all the times she'd faced down hatred with unshakable dignity. Tonight, that dignity had helped bring justice. Tonight, the shadows receded a little further. Outside, red and blue lights painted the trees as more law enforcement arrived. The conspirators were loaded into transport vans, their white robes traded for handcuffs. Tomorrow's headlines would shake the county to its foundations. But for now, Daniel focused on his mother, holding her hand as paramedics checked her injuries. The night wasn't over, but the worst had passed. The evil that had counted on good people staying afraid had finally met something stronger: a mother's courage and a son's determination to see justice done. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Reporters clutched microphones and cameras, their excitement electric in the cool morning air. This wasn't just another small-town crime story. This was the exposure of generations of hidden hatred. Loretta sat in the front row of the courtroom, her posture straight despite the bandages on her wrists. She wore her Sunday best, a pearl blue dress and her mother's cameo brooch. Daniel stood protective beside her in his FBI jacket, his badge catching the fluorescent lights. Through the courthouse windows, they could hear the crowd growing outside. Black community members stood shoulder to shoulder with white allies, holding signs demanding justice. The wall of silence that had protected racist violence for so long was crumbling. Angela Morris strode into the courtroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her briefcase bulged with motions and federal statutes. She'd been up all night preparing, fueled by coffee and righteous determination. She nodded to Loretta and Daniel before taking her place at the prosecutor's table. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The side door opened, and the parade of shame began. Sheriff Roy Cutter shuffled in first, his hands and feet shackled. His uniform was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that seemed to drain the arrogance from his face. His wounded shoulder was bandaged, and he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Troy Cutter followed, his swagger replaced by sullen defeat. Behind them came the others, the mayor's brother-in-law, the deputies, the football coach, and more. 15 men who'd hidden their hatred behind respectability, now exposed in the harsh light of justice. Cameras flashed through the courthouse windows. This moment would be on every news channel by noon. The fall of a corrupt sheriff and his clan conspirators, brought down by the very people they'd tried to terrorize. Angela stood, her voice clear and strong. "Your Honor, the United States moves to charge these defendants under federal hate crime statutes with additional charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, kidnapping, and civil rights violations." She laid out the evidence: the attack on Loretta, the firebombing, the kidnapping, and the planned mass rally of violence. "Furthermore," she continued, "we have evidence linking these defendants to a broader network of organized hate groups across 3 states. The FBI is executing search warrants as we speak." The defendants' lawyers shifted uncomfortably. They knew what the evidence meant. No deals, no quiet pleas, no sweeping this under the rug. Their clients would face the full weight of federal law. Through it all, Loretta sat quietly, her eyes never leaving the men who'd attacked her. She wasn't afraid anymore. Let them see her strength. Let them know their hatred had failed. Outside, reporters surged forward as Daniel escorted Loretta from the courthouse. Camera flashes exploded around them, but Loretta moved with dignity, her head high. "Mrs. Jennings, how does it feel to see your attackers in custody?" "Agent Jennings!" "Did you know about the sheriff's clan connections before the raid?" Daniel guided his mother through the crowd, but Loretta paused at the microphones. Her voice carried clearly across the courthouse steps. "My husband built our home with his own hands," she said. "He taught our son to stand up to evil. These men thought they could frighten me away with their hatred. Instead, they brought their own darkness into the light." The cameras rolled as she spoke, capturing every word. Behind her, Daniel stood proud, the son who'd turned his mother's pain into justice. The image would become iconic: an elderly black woman's quiet strength backed by her FBI agent son's protective presence. News helicopters circled overhead as they drove to the hospital for Loretta's follow-up examination. Her bruises needed checking, though her spirit was unbroken. The doctor insisted on keeping her overnight for observation. In her hospital room that evening, the TV played endless coverage of the arrests. Experts discussed the broader implications. How many other police departments might harbor similar secrets? How many other communities lived under the shadow of protected hatred? Loretta sat propped up in bed, watching the footage with Daniel. The sunset painted the room in warm colors, so different from the harsh lantern light of the barn. On screen, Angela Morris gave interviews about federal charges and systemic change. "Look at that," Loretta said softly, pointing to images of the crowd outside the courthouse, black and white together, saying no more. "That's what your father dreamed of." Daniel adjusted her pillows, his touch gentle. "I wish he could have seen it." "He sees," Loretta smiled, taking his hand. "Your father would be proud. not just of catching them, but of doing it the right way, using the law to bring justice, not revenge. A nurse brought in dinner, pausing to watch the news coverage. On screen, Sheriff Cutter's booking photo showed a broken man, his power stripped away by the truth. The ticker below announced expanded federal investigations into hate group infiltration of law enforcement. "It's not over," Daniel said, watching the coverage. "There are more out there, more networks to expose." "But they're afraid now," Loretta replied. "Afraid because one old woman wouldn't be silenced. Afraid because good people finally stood together." She squeezed his hand. "Your father would be proud." The setting sun cast long shadows across her hospital bed. But unlike the shadows of hatred that had haunted their town, these would fade with the dawn of a new day. Justice had finally stepped into the light. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as the trials entered their third week. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Loretta sat in her usual spot in the front row, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching as justice slowly but surely unfolded. Today's witness was Thomas Henderson, the white neighbor who'd lived next door to Loretta for 20 years. His hands trembled as he took the oath, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd stayed silent through years of watching harassment, but now, faced with federal prosecutors and the weight of his conscience, he couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Yes, I saw them that night," Henderson testified, refusing to meet the defendant's glares. "Sheriff Cutter's truck was parked outside Mrs. Jennings's house. I heard the glass breaking, heard her cry out." He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. I should have called someone. Should have helped." Angela Morris approached the witness stand, her heels clicking against the floor. "And why didn't you, Mr. Henderson?" "Because—" He swallowed hard. "Because everyone knew the sheriff protected them. The mayor, too. They'd make your life hell if you spoke up." The prosecution presented emails, phone records, and bank statements. Money had flowed from the mayor's office through shell companies to fund Klan activities. Building permits were denied to black businesses, while known hate group members received special treatment. The web of corruption stretched through every level of local government. Mayor Wilson sat at the defense table, his face ashen as his own secretary testified about shredded documents and midnight meetings. His expensive suit couldn't hide his nervous sweating as more evidence mounted. Leaked texts showing him coordinating with Sheriff Cutter to suppress complaints about racist incidents, recordings of him threatening city workers who questioned the pattern. During a brief recess, Daniel stood in the courthouse hallway, watching reporters scribble in notepads. The story had grown beyond their small town. Federal investigators were now examining similar patterns in counties across 3 states. What started with an attack on his mother had exposed a cancer of hatred that had metastasized through the whole region. When court resumed, Daniel took the stand. He sat straight-backed in his FBI jacket, his voice steady as he explained how he'd tracked the network. "The attack on my mother wasn't random," he testified. "It was part of a systematic effort to intimidate and control through fear. The sheriff's department didn't just ignore complaints. They actively protected the perpetrators." Angela Morris displayed photos on the courtroom screen. Burned crosses documented but never investigated. Vandalized churches marked as low priority. Threatening letters dismissed as pranks. "And what did you discover about the mayor's involvement?" she asked. "Mayor Wilson used his position to facilitate these activities," Daniel explained. "Building permits were weaponized. Police patrols were redirected away from targeted neighborhoods. City contracts went to businesses connected to known hate group members." In the gallery, Loretta watched her son with quiet pride. He'd transformed her pain into purpose, using the law to tear down what hatred had built. The defendants shifted uncomfortably as Daniel detailed their networks, their secrets, their carefully hidden ties to violence. The evidence was overwhelming. Day after day, more city officials resigned as their connections to the conspiracy emerged. The morning paper ran daily updates on new indictments, new investigations, new revelations of how deep the corruption went. When the prosecution rested, the defense attorneys barely mounted an argument. How could they, with their clients' crimes captured on surveillance video, documented in their own emails, confirmed by multiple witnesses? The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. The courtroom was packed for the verdict. Reverend Harris sat beside Loretta, holding her hand. Angela Morris stood tall at the prosecutor's table, while Daniel watched from his place near the door. In the matter of the United States versus Roy Cutter, the jury foreman read, on the charge of conspiracy against rights, we find the defendant guilty. The litany of guilty verdicts continued. Sheriff Cutter, 25 years. Troy Cutter, 18 years. Mayor Wilson, 15 years. One by one, the men who'd terrorized their community faced justice. When the final verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Years of fear and silence broke like a dam. People hugged, cried, raised their hands in triumph. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. Loretta remained seated, tears sliding down her cheeks as she watched her tormentors led away in chains. Angela Morris turned to her with a bright smile, while Reverend Harris squeezed her shoulder in support. Through the courthouse windows, they could hear the crowd outside celebrating. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the moment to the nation. This wasn't just about one town anymore. It was about breaking the grip of hatred everywhere it festered. "You did it, Mama," Daniel said softly, coming to sit beside her. "Your courage made this happen." "We did it," she corrected him, taking his hand. "All of us together. That's what it takes to beat hatred. People standing together in the light." The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, touching everything with gold. In its warm glow, Loretta watched as the last defendant was led away. Their power was gone, their networks exposed, their reign of terror ended. The courtroom gradually emptied, but Loretta sat a moment longer, feeling the weight of history in this place. How many others had waited decades for such justice? How many had never seen it at all? She said a silent prayer of thanks, both for this victory and for the strength to have endured until it came. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.